And I think you're muted.
Okay, how about now?
Sounds good.
Good. Yeah,
Okay,
sounds good.
that was awkward. So welcome everyone. The feature freeze is today. There'll be a build cut tonight. Testing day is next week. I have 3 PRs that are waiting for a review from this working group that should go in 1.7. Does anyone else have any PRs that need a review from us? Okay, great. The ones I have, I'm hoping people look at. One to flag deprecated and removed types. This was done for the mixer people. It now also will warn you if you have the CRDs for the old RBAC that no longer works.
Yeah, I approved that PR. I think it looked good. Yeah,
excellent.
And Ed, I went ahead and improved the authority PR, so all that's left is cube inject.
Perfect. So, and that one was tiny. That was just Greg and some networking folks were complaining about not seeing an error message. So I just make the error message show up later, sort of save it in a slice and print it at the end. So we have a number of items that were marked for 1.7 that we should do, or maybe not. Some of our 1.7s I retargeted for 1.8 because I told Shweta they're not getting done. Most of the items that are on this list we share with someone else. And when we have the 1.7 review, I'm going to say that it's a bad practice to have items shared by 2 work groups because no one knows whose job it is to assign someone to fix it or how important it is. I think this is the analyze one that I have a PR for. It's the only blocker. There were, and I didn't put the titles here, but there is a lot that were co-ran with telemetry, and telemetry did not make many of its 1.7 goals apparently. So probably all of these will be retargeted. None of them I could really do unless I already have a PR sort of for them. I think the one that is important is the one that we share with environment. The UX for control plane upgrade, that is assigned to Richard Zinnin. We probably need to see if that can be done.
I talked to Richard yesterday, and he said he intended to have it done.
Actually, it is done as far as I know, unless you guys need something else there. So the PR is committed and appears to be working.
Okay. And those were some items that we're only really testing. We didn't really do it. So thanks to environments for actually doing that. Another one I don't know the status of one is this one that Shamster from Red Hat did to issue a warning if the installed version is different than the CLI version. Is Shamster on the call? Okay, so I'll have to follow up and see what the status of that one is. And Jason, are you on the call?
Yep.
What's the deal with this one, the line number 1?
Yeah, so Xiaopeng, our intern on our team, is working on that. So I think, yeah, so he has a PR for that. Clay and I are reviewing and providing feedback. So is it marked as a 1.7 requirement or feature?
It was marked as 1.7, I think, just in. So should we retarget it or should we try to get it done?
So from my personal opinion, I don't think it's like a strong requirement for 1.7. I would mark it as 1.8 because it's our target is it's to finish it by end of the intern season. So yeah, I think it will be too tight schedule for 1.7.
Fair enough.
Yep. Thanks.
So one item that might interest people, it's certainly not going to get done for 1.7, it's going to be moved, is telemetry wants a dashboard for monitoring the Envoy WASM extensions. They don't, I think, have a document. So if anyone on this team wants to get more involved with the WASM stuff, I played around with it. I would welcome such a dashboard. I'm not sure what they are looking for, but they might appreciate some eyes from us on these Envoy extensions they're doing. So as you know, these meetings are all recorded. I wanted to call attention to the fact that I actually uploaded the last, the ones which I had not been uploading since Corona, and I put them in our little playlist. The way that the Istio channel is organized is that each working group gets a playlist so that their meetings can all be together in addition to under the main Istio channel. So this would be how you would find a meeting if you were unsure what I had promised that you would do when you weren't attending or anything like that. So now that the build is over, we want to focus our features are frozen and testing is coming. We want to focus on the documentation. So Frank Badinsky, who's the documents lead, has divided up all of the documentation on Istio.io by working group and then assigned it sort of to us. So we have 33 documents. That's the second highest. So this represents all of the pages that are manually created in our documentation. And what he has proposed, or what he's set up, is pretty interesting. When you click, it brings you to the documentation, and it shows X page test if there is a page test. And what this means is this documentation automatically being tested? So some of our documentation is automatically tested, and the commands that people run, like this, actually are in annotations on the markdown, and it is turned into a script that gets run, I think, every time the documentation gets built. Maybe every time Istio gets built, I'm not sure which. But so if anyone wants to write automated tests or learn about this framework for doing it, write some. I promised some people that I would contribute several tests at the beginning of the cycle, and I have not started them yet. So I'm going to be getting into this later on this week, and I encourage everyone who wants to write tests to do that. If not, theoretically, people are going to have to fill out a spreadsheet and test these manually. So this is supposed to keep our documentation in sync with what we're actually developing. And click here for instructions on how to automate. Any questions about that? I actually think it's cool. I haven't seen anyone else doing this kind of automated testing, so I look forward to trying it out. So we need to kick off 1.8 soon and prepare our sort of design for that. Mitch and I started working on the items that we sort of expect to get from networking. If you remember, for 1.7, we had a lot of difficulties. We tried together with Liam to propose an API that was going to be used for a replacement for a lot of the troubleshooting commands, and Istio was going to offer it. We got sort of shot down by Costin and networking, or he agreed, but then it was late. So Mitch and I have started working on this what we expect networking to sort of do for us. And so the first thing I would encourage is everyone in this group to look and see if the things that we're asking for to do what we think our tasks are, if these are what you need for your stuff. I might not be aware of what you feel Istio needs to provide for your stuff. Leah or Mitch, do you want to walk people through what we're already asking so they get an idea of what stuff they should be asking for?
Yeah, sure. So our top requirement is the federated view of XDS events. And that is essentially saying that if we're going to treat the XDS endpoint over a load balancer as a debug service that we can access, then it needs to respond on behalf of the whole service. Currently, if you submit a debug request over XDS events, you will get a response from whichever Istio you happen to land on, and the response will be completely different from one Istio to the next. So we need that to be like an aggregated view from all instances of Istio. This is kind of the implication of having a stateful service. So there's going to need to be some improvements there.
I want to warn people that that only affects non-Kubernetes Istio. If you actually have Istio running on your own control plane and your own cluster, as we did in previous versions, it'll all be fine.
Right, and the way that we do that right now is by port forwarding, which eventually we'd like to stop doing. We'd like to be able to treat this like a service. So there's kind of two reasons there. One is for central Istio support, as Ed mentioned, when you're running in sort of an environment that you don't have access to, port forwarding is not an option. The second reason is we'd really like to begin exposing this API, not in the 1.8 time frame, but like around 1.9. We'd like to start allowing our users to integrate directly with this API. I'm thinking of users like Kiali, who would love to have the output, say, of proxy status or of Istio cuddle wait and be able to reflect that in their user interface. They're not going to run an Istio cuddle command under the hood and like drop down to bash level to parse what they've got and then bring it back up into the UI. They need a real API to interact with. And so that's kind of a blocker for both of those use cases. I'll move quicker through the others. Our auth-z for XDS events, we have auth-n. You have to provision a certificate to get XDS events, but the auth-z is unclear. It's not clear once I've provisioned certificate materials, which events should I have access to, which events should I not have access to. We need a clear story there so that workload operators can run these APIs without any special permissions to the control plane and get back only results that are relevant to them. Same on the other side of auth-n. Right now, the certificate provisioning is a bit hairy. It's same for provisioning certificates for VMs, as I understand it. It is a little bit challenging. We need that workflow to be a lot smoother. Ideally, we'd like for Istio CTL to be able to provision certificates on behalf of the user automatically so that we don't need to we don't have prerequisites to running these commands. We don't want using these new commands to be harder than using the old commands. We also need to be able to list control planes that are present in a given cluster. Networking and environments have advised us that this is not exhaustively possible, and that's fine. This is sort of a best effort sort of scenario, but we have two ways that we need to be able to look at this. We need to see what control planes are available, and then we also need to know for a particular pod, which control plane is it connected to so that we know which XDS endpoint to connect to get relevant debug information related to that pod.
And I'll show an RFC for that later in this meeting.
Sweet. Let's see, the XDS events that we are using right now for the experimental Istio control commands are not documented, and we'd like to see that happen very soon. It sort of feels like an alpha level interface that could get changed out from underneath us. And before we invest too much more heavily there, we'd like to see a lot more concrete detail, both in documentation and in support guarantees. The way that we're connecting to XDS events doesn't make a lot of sense. If you look in the PRs that Ed has done a great job pushing through, the connection parameters are very confusing. We're actually spoofing a proxy. We're giving ourselves a proxy ID as though we were a regular proxy connecting to Istio. which is of course not the case. And so when we go to make this API accessible to our customers, we can't have that. We need a connection parameters that actually make sense for the operations they're trying to apply. That's rationalization. UX misses the. Oh yeah, the debug auth Z endpoint needs to have a replacement. I think, Ed, we're looking for a replacement on the XDS endpoint, right? We're not looking for the re-addition of the debug API.
Correct. So, and this is the describe command that Ram and I worked so hard on for 1.4 used to print all this great stuff about what was TLS, what was not TLS. We need to restore that information that was removed in 1.5.
Yeah, so this is what we'd like to see with regard to XDS events in 1.8. All of these, or almost all of these, we are not able to accomplish on our own. We at least need the active cooperation of the networking group. In a couple of cases, Costin has said that he has kind of a mental model and a design for how he wants to implement these things. And so we just need some follow through there. But we lacked visibility on these things in the 1.7 release. And so I think a lot of our dependencies went unmet. So we want to try to be a little bit more formal in the 1.8 release and get unblocked so that some of these awesome features that we're working on can make their way up to beta level and be usable for our customers. So I wanted to ask specifically, are there any other things we're blocked on networking that people know about? I know that a lot of us were working on the troubleshooting API during the 1.7 cycle. There were a lot of design meetings, and I am sure that we didn't collect every relevant detail here. What did we miss?
Maybe we got it all, Mitch.
Wow. First time's a charm. That's not right.
Well, as we do, when we come back to do our 1.8 commitments, we will make sure that we have the stuff on here to make them happen this time.
Yeah, and I would say as we progress through 1.8, design and development, if we do take out dependencies on networking that are not on this list, please raise them to our attention early so that we can make sure those are tracked as a part of the official release and have visibility. That's mostly on me for not doing that earlier in this release, and I think has resulted in some difficulty for all of us. So I think we can make that better this next time.
Okay, the phone shouldn't ring anymore. So I wanted to get some early feedback on a better way to list Istio control planes. We had promised to do this for 1.7. We did not because we were confused about what was our job, what was environments, what was networking's. So I created this RFC, and I'm going to get everyone, all those groups, to sort of agree on it. And it has two pieces, a sort of a user side and a local control plane administration side. So most users who are using Istio today are installing it themselves with Istio Cuddle install. When they do that, they are allowed to have multiple installation of control planes such as canaries, but they might forget what they have installed. So the first step is to create a sort of command which will hold subcommands about administering Istio itself. So we want to get away from the fact that we spread all of the commands around, the commands for administering the control plane, like upgrade, verify install. They're all spread about, and we'd like to put them together. We'd like to provide a list of what the user has already installed, including canaries. And then we'd like users to know what they are allowed to use for injector labels for their main control plane and their canaries, whether or not they've installed themselves and whether or not they're in a multi-cluster environment. So the first thing I tried to do was just sketch what listing of control planes would look like. This seems too small, so let me paste this onto a different document. I did it sort of this way to, let me actually paste it here. File, new file. Okay. So when we list our control planes, so first I installed 4 control planes myself using Istio install. I did a standard control plane with very few parameters. I did a control plane as a canary. I did a control plane as being a multi-cluster client for a remote plane. And I did an install of a control plane with a central SDOD administration. So everything that you see here was done using the existing commands. And you may not know, but every time we create a cluster, we have two ways to install. One is you've installed the operator, the standalone operator for Istio. You make a Istio operator resource, you apply it, the operator then stands up a control plane for you. The other is if you install with the command line, we install everything, and then in addition to installing everything, we write the operator that we just installed out, like a bill of materials. And in theory, you could have the actual operator take over. You could install the real operator and it would start trying to keep things in sync, although I don't know how well that works. So that means that no matter how you've installed Istio, whether it's been through apply or Istio install, there's an Istio operator for each install that you've done. So if you do, and you can do this today, kubectl get Istio operator all namespaces. You can see how many you have, and we can see here that I have installed 2 of them, and we have a custom column revision for canaries. So this is great. It tells you what you have installed. It doesn't tell you if anyone's using those installations. So what I tried to add in this command is the following. The status field on the Istio operator CR, this is currently only set if you're running the operator pod deployment to manage it. So, and that tells you if it's in the process of installing or finished. If you just install with Istio, you just get an unknown here. A list of how many pods are in Istio for this setup. And that's, of course, the pods can only be counted if it's on your local cluster and you have access and permission to look. If you're running on a central Istio, that same column is listing the endpoint of central Istio. I just thought that was cool to reuse that column. The version would normally say 1.7, although this was a private build for me. It currently, because I didn't actually have a cloud at this location, it says unknown, but it would give you the central Istio version. And of course, it's unknown if the pods didn't come up for some reason. But then I added the number of proxies that are using that control plane. And that's the same information you get now from Istio version. In theory, you could run Istio version on each revision here, but this brings it all up in one piece, which is nice, and then gives you the injector label that a user would use if they wanted this particular control plane to inject. Does anyone understand why I'm showing this all?
Ed, I know one of the chief objections so far had been around feasibility. Is this all being taken from data that exists today, or is some of this TBD in terms of implementation design.
I implemented the whole thing and haven't put it out yet as a PR. This was produced by actual code that I wrote. And it's not much code either. It's pretty small. There's
Nice.
only a couple problems with it. Let's go back to the document. So, of course, the first problem is that it's weird to see status as unknown for every single example. It would be nice to know what the operator thinks the status was. Martin suggested that we sort of say not just that it's healthy, but which operator is in charge of it, or if an operator is keeping it in sync, or if it was just installed by Istio, so maybe like an origin column. So I have questions sort of about that. The other question I have is about the to get the information in terms of version and number of proxies. These two items required me to, in the current implementation, go out to the insecure XDS port. So what Costin has been doing is he's been having 1512 offer XDS securely with certificates, and 1510 offer XDS to anyone who cares to connect. And when I install Istio with, when I install two control planes, each one would have different security. So I didn't do the work that would be needed to use the secure channel. And I don't know if the insecure channel is going to be enabled by default. And I certainly think it'd be a mistake to base this on that insecure channel. But my config file doesn't have a way to list each control plane certificates. It thinks Istio just has it's using environment variable to choose which control plane, and that's going to end up biting us. But otherwise, it's all there, except for security.
So Ed, in the case of central IstioD being leveraged by one of the pods, that would not show up in this list, correct?
Well, central IstioD shows up here, but the number of proxies, maybe it's going to be unknown because maybe central IstioD won't tell you how many proxies there are. Or maybe it will be known because sync status does work against central IstioD. So I think that it might actually be able to say the true number of proxies for central IstioD. So let's say you installed Istio from IBM in a central way and from, say, Microsoft come up with a version, or Red Hat, and you had different injector labels if you wanted IBM to manage your namespace or Microsoft to manage your namespace. I think this would all work, minus the security stuff, because I haven't implemented how to select which certificate bundle to use.
That's pretty cool, Ed.
So when I was doing that, I realized that most of those columns only are of interest to the administrator. So I proposed that, and I've implemented it now just as a flag on the admin command, but I think that we would want a client-based version that just tells you what injector label to use for all of your control planes. So this is pretty nice. If you want default to manage your control plane, you just set injector label, you just label your namespace with this. If you want your canary or whatever, you would just label it with that. This should make it really simple. So the code is not interesting, but I think that we could easily have this as long as we sort of have, as long as Costin likes it, or maybe environments and us together on this idea of it's going to be based around the Istio operator custom resource. And if we can nail down how security will work to actually contact XDS for more than one control plan at a time. I think we have smooth sailing for this item. So some people have already were told about this before this meeting. Many of you, this is the first time you're hearing about it. Please add comments to this document so that we can make this be one of our features for 1.8.
Very cool, Ed.
Thank you, Mitch. But others have been very silent during this meeting. Maybe everyone's heads are down finishing up their 1.7 PRs. Does anyone have any items for this week or proposals for things we should do next week? Does anyone want to hear me beg them to do automated testing for the items on our that our working group owns? Okay, great. Well, it looks like we get about 25 minutes back.
Thanks a lot, Ed.
Okay, have a good day, everyone.
Thanks.